Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum. I welcome you all to the fourth lecture on the subject Management, Organizational Policies and Practices. Before we start with today's topic, I would like to give you a brief review of our last subject of discussion, which was on the external environment that an organization faces. So we discussed the industrial organizational view, which is about the external assessment that an organization must carry in order to find out what are the opportunities and what are the various strengths that an organization faces from the external environment. It should keep a scan, it should make a scan of the external environment, it should forecast the external environment, and it should analyze the external environment and find out what are the various opportunities and strengths for the organization, because it is the external environment as per this view which can give an organization a competitive advantage, a sustained competitive advantage. We also studied that there are three layers that an organization has or a firm has. One is the external most layer that it faces, which is the external environment. It is also called the macro environment or the general environment. We explained this layer with the help of the PESTEL framework. PESTEL gives an explanation with 6 segments in the macro environment which affect the organization. So there can be an interplay between those 6 segments of the environment that can affect the organization together, or those segments can affect the organization independent of each other, or their effects can be different for different organizations, and they can be different for different sectors and for different for different firms within those sectors. So we discussed in detail under the PESTEL framework the political factors, the economic factors, the societal factors or socio-cultural factors, the technological factors, the environmental factors, and the legal factors, their influences on the organization. Then we had a discussion on the industry environment. Under the industry environment is the inner layer that an organization faces from the environment. So it was explained with the help of the Porter's 5 forces model or the 5 forces comparative framework. Industry environment is as opposed to the macro environment, inner layer that of the environment that an organization faces, and it has more direct effect on the organization's survival, on the organization's profitability. So because the industry in which an organization is operating, it is formed of other firms which are producing the same product or which are providing the same line of service. So the some industries, they are inherently more profitable than the other industries are. Then it also depends on a number of factors which are explained by the Porter's 5 forces framework that determine that how much an organization can be profitable in an industry. What are the factors that determine the organization's profitability? What are the factors that determine its chances of success? And what are the factors that can be a threat to the survival of the organization? So we discussed 5 different forces, which were the negotiation or the buying power of the substitutes, the negotiation power of the suppliers. We also discussed the competitive rivalry in the industry between the firms. We discussed the substitutes, the availability of the substitute products, right? So we had the discussion on all these factors in detail, that how these factors affect or influence the organization, the environment of the organization, and what are their implications for management, how management can deal with it. We also discussed the threats to entry or the barriers to entry, and and how the competitors or the potential competitors, how they can overcome those barriers. We also had a discussion on this. So and then we discussed the concept of the strategic groups, which was vis-a-vis the direct competitors of the organization. So and we discussed that the competitors, or they are the innermost layer of the external environment that an organization faces. They are the competitors. In the industry environment, we had a discussion that there are certain firms operating in the same industry as your firm is operating, but they may not be your direct competitors, because they are operating in the same product, or they have the same product range, but maybe they are targeting a different market segment, or they have the different strategic customers, they have different strategic locations, right? And they have different product mix. That is why they are not, or they cannot be termed as your direct competitors. But under strategic group is the concept which has been given to understand your direct competitors. So under the strategic groups, those firms fall who are competing with your firm on the basis of the product, on the basis of the geographic location, on the basis of the product mix, on the basis of the market segment, on the basis of the strategic customers. So on the basis of all these areas, they are competing with you. They are similar to you. And here I gave the example of the corner shop and a supermarket, that how they belong to different strategic groups, and the entry barriers from one strategic group to the other strategic group can be the same as they are under the industry environment. Under the 5 forces model, the entry barriers that we discussed, they also apply to the entry barriers that might be faced by one strategic group when it wants to enter, a firm wants to enter in another strategic group from that strategic group. So this was our topic for our last lecture. We had a discussion on the external environment and its consequences for the management, its implications for the management, that how the management can draw its policies strategically to face the external environment, and how it should respond to the different contexts and different environmental challenges. For today's lecture, we are going to discuss the internal environment of the organization. So, as I told you earlier, there are 4 sections or 4 parts in the SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. We discussed the opportunities and threats which are coming to the organization from the external environment in our previous lecture, and in today's lecture we are going to discuss the internal assessment. Why internal assessment is necessary, why we need to see what are the strengths of the organization and what are the weaknesses of the organization, and how strategic it is to have an assessment of the internal strengths and weaknesses of the organization. So till now what we have done is that, if I try to give you a very brief and coherent overview of what we have done so far, is that we have, if we talk about the management in strategic terms, the strategic management topics that I have taught you so far, if I try to link them all up and we try to see that where we are now, what we have done so far is that we have seen that how firms make a clear statement of vision and mission. We saw the importance of vision and mission statements, the important contents of these statements, how these statements are made, right, and how these statements give a strategic purpose to the organization. So basing on these, they are the starting point where the organizational strategy emerges, right? Without a vision and mission statement, it's difficult to formulate an organizational policies and organizational strategies, right? So that is why it was important to explain you the concept of vision and mission statements, how they are formulated, and how they give signals to the different stakeholders of the organization as to what are the purposes of existence of the organization. Then we discuss the external environment of the organization, which I also gave you a recap on. Then today's topic is to discuss the internal strengths and weaknesses of the organization. So when an organization has undertaken these steps, that is, it has made a vision and mission statement, it has undertaken an external environment analysis, and it has also undertaken an internal environment analysis, then it is in a position, on the basis of making these assessments and on the basis of drawing its vision and mission, it is in a position to draw its strategic policy, right? It's possible for the organization to draw its objectives, right? It is possible for it to formulate its policy and draw the objectives and the policies so that those strategies can be implemented successfully, right? So all the management policies, the earlier steps to formulating those management policies are the ones which you are seeing right now on this slide. So for the internal audit, the internal assessment, what we have to do, how we have to gauge our internal strengths and the weaknesses. Of course, we need to perform an audit. Just as we performed an external environmental audit, we also need to perform an internal environmental audit to see what are our strengths and what are our weaknesses. As you all must be familiar about the how an organization works. We know that a traditional, typical organization, it is divided into as per the functions that it is performing, right? So there is a management function which is being performed in the organization. There's a marketing function or a marketing department, which we also call. So it is an organization, according to the functions that it is performing, it is divided into departments. So some very big organizations, they can be divided into a large number of departments, and smaller organizations may have fewer departments. So let's first see that what can be the different departments that an organization can be spreaded into. Management, we have marketing, we have finance and accounting departments in the organizations, we have productions and operations department, research and development department, management information systems department. There can be a number of departments that an organization can be spread into. So for smaller organizations, there may not be a management department, and the floor manager of the organization might be carrying on the management functions, or human resource management functions. They're generally performed by the line managers, right? They may not have that separate department, right? Similarly, in small organizations, they may not be having the very active research and development department, or a very independent research and development center or department. But in large organizations, in the multinational companies, or in the research-oriented firms, or in the technology-based firms, this kind of department can be very vital, right, or one of the key departments of the organization, right? Okay, so these are the different departments that an organization can have, and it needs to have a fair knowledge of where these different department stand, what are their respective strengths, what are their respective weaknesses, right? For example, marketing department, what are the different strengths of the marketing department? Do you have a very strong sales team, or you do not have a good marketing staff or marketing representatives? Right, and same goes for the production operations, your information systems, your IT systems, right, and the system with which you can keep your databases about the customers. Some organizations, they have very strong MIT systems, and some organizations have weak MIT systems. Some organizations have the resources to handle those MIT systems, and some do not have. So all the aspects, these aspects, you need to have an information department-wise about all the different aspects, that what are the different strengths and what are the different weaknesses of all these different functions in the organization. And coordination and understanding among managers from all these functional areas, that is very important. That is the key to organizational success. Good coordination between the functional managers, between these different functional units, is important in order to have a coherent view of where the organization stands. In our very first lectures, we had done the skills that are important for a manager to have, and we had done the conceptual skills. So here you should be able to relate that concept or that phenomenon with this concept that we are discussing here, that how, in order to have the conceptual skills, is that how you can interrelate the different aspects of the organization, the different functions in the organization, and how you can see them, your capacity, your capability to see them as a whole, right? So out of the external analysis, we draw the outcomes, that what are the opportunities and threats available to the organization. I'm not going to discuss it again here, of course. And then from the internal analysis, we have the outcomes, that what are your unique resources and what are your capabilities and competencies, right? So after the study of the internal environment, you should be able to find out what are the different resources or the unique resources that you have, what are the capabilities that you have, and what are the competencies that you have to perform certain activities or to give certain output, to produce certain product or to give certain services. Resource-based view of the firm is opposed to the industrial organizational view of the firm. Resource-based view, it was basically given by Barney, and as per this view, as we discussed earlier, it is your knowledge, your understanding of the strengths and the weaknesses that your company have, and it is the resources that the company has, and it is the competencies and the capabilities that the company has that are important, that are critical to attaining the competitive advantage of the company and to sustaining the competitive advantage of the company. So as per this view, a firm can gain competitive advantage based on the opportunities and threats, or based on its external assessment and its opportunities that it gains from the external environment, and based on how it faces the threats from the external environment, how it overcomes those threats, how it transforms those threats into challenges for itself, into opportunities for itself. It can gain competitive advantage on the basis of the assessment of its external environment and its positioning vis-a-vis the external environment, but it may not be possible for the organization to sustain the competitive advantage that it gains like that. So for sustained competitive advantage, an organization needs to identify its strengths and weaknesses, and it needs to have some unique resources and unique capabilities that can provide it competitive advantage. How it happens, why is that so? Let's discuss it in the future slides. Let's have first have a look at some key concepts for this presentation. One, we'll be really talking about the resources. So resources, as you all know, they are a firm's assets, including people and the value of its brand name. So they represent inputs into a firm's production process, such as a firm can have a number of resources: its capital equipment, skills of employees, brand names, financial resources, talented managers, raw material, and strategic location. They're all the resources, and we just try to categorize them in the following. We see that there are two types of resources basically. One is the tangible resources that an organization has, and the other one is the intangible resources that an organization has. And I'm sure you're all familiar with this concept of tangible and intangible resources. So let's have a brief look into what comes under the tangible resources. We have the financial resources, we have the physical resources, such as an organization has some really is placed in some strategic location, right? It is technological resources, it is really abreast in the technology, it is state-of-the-art technology, right? And then it is the it is the really IT manpower, right? And it's the organizational resources. Organizational resources such as the brand name, right? And then it has the intangible resources, which are the reputation and the innovation capabilities of the organization. They are the intangible resources. Then the reputation of the organization, they are the intangible resources of the organization. So the raw material here, I gave you an example of the raw material, which is a resource of the organization. So if you have a look into the tangible resources, we'll see that raw material, it can, for example, be a financial resource for an organization, in a way that you have access to the very cheap raw material, or you have built relationships with your suppliers in a way that you have access to the cheap raw material, right? Or you're placed in a strategic location which is very close to the raw material, and you are saving on the logistic cost, right? And that is giving you a edge, right? And that is a resource for you. Then we see that what are the different types of resources. There are the threshold resources, and they can be the unique resources. So let's first see the threshold resources. Threshold resources are the resources that are needed to meet customers' minimum requirements and therefore to continue to exist. So threshold resources are those resources which are needed for a firm to stay in the line of business. If those resources are not available to the firm, it cannot stay in the line of business. So for example, for a hospital, it is important to have certain medical facilities. It is important to have certain infrastructure, certain basic equipment, medical machinery, and things like that. right? So they are the minimum resources, they are the minimum requirements, so in the shape of some infrastructure, in the shape of some physical facilities, in the shape of some machinery, in the shape of some technology. They are the threshold resources. They are the minimum requirements that it needs to have to stay in the line of business. If they are not there, it does not exist anymore, right? So I have another example here, that is the retailer. If a retailer requires that the supplier should possess some IT infrastructure system, right, which is needed to meet its retailing requirements, that is the threshold resource. If the supplier does not have that IT infrastructure system, then the retailer is not going to enter into the business with that supplier, right? So that is the minimum requirement for the supplier to enter into some agreement with the retailer. Then we have the threshold competencies as well. Threshold competencies, first, what are the competencies? I need to explain this concept to you. Competencies are those activities or processes that deploy the resources that an organization has, right? So these are the activities and the processes which are used to deploy the resources that the organization has. And threshold competencies are those activities and processes which are needed to meet the minimum requirements of your customers, and they are again needed, they are again the minimum requirements which you need to fulfill to exist in the line of business. So if we go back to the example that I gave you about the supplier and the retailer, and the supplier need to have an IT system, the supplier also needs to utilize, or it should also be able to use that IT system effectively. So there should be a process, there should be an activity, of course there should be an underlying process to use that IT system. Otherwise, having a good IT infrastructure, having a good IT system is of no use, right? So you also should be able to use that effect. So here what is involved is the activity or the process that is involved to deploy that resource, right? That is the competency. So you need to have, of course, a minimum level of competency also to use that system, to be able to use that system and produce results, right? So that is the threshold competency. Then we have the threshold level changes over time with the change in the critical success factors. So the critical success factors are those factors which are the minimum requirements by the customers for the production of for the output or for the product or for the service that the firm needs to mean, which are critical in the eyes of the customers and which you must fulfill. So if those critical success factors, they can change over time with the change in the needs, with the change in the lifestyles, with the change in the taste of the customers, right? And with there can be a number of other factors globally in your external environment as well as in your internal environment that can lead to the change in the critical success factors, right? For example, we have the example of this traditional banking versus online banking. Now there is increasingly the concept of online. If you go to the European countries, or you have a study of the European countries, you will see that in the European countries, most of the banking is now being done online. There's a concept of branchless banking. In Pakistan, concept of branchless banking is not very common, but with the passage of time, because the rate of transfer of technology to Pakistan is relatively low, it is relatively slow, right? And but still there are online banking facilities are being provided by some banks even in Pakistan now, right? So when a bank provides a service of online banking, it means that the customer is able to do all the transactions online sitting in his home. He does not need to go to the bank. He can make all the transactions himself, whether he has to make an international transaction or he has to make a local transaction. He can make all the debits and credits himself. He can check his balance himself. He can take out his balance sheet, his statement. He can perform every service himself, sitting home or sitting in his office or anywhere. He can access his account without going to a bank. Right, so that is branchless banking. So what is happening is that with the concept of this branchless banking, or with the concept of the facility of the online banking, the traditional banking concept is eroding, right? So the traditional banking is of course losing its value in the eyes of the customers, right? So here what is happening is that your critical success factors are changing. Now you have your minimum requirements to survive in the business are changing. Can you imagine a bank not offering the ATM services? You cannot. So at one time, now what is happening is that your critical success factor or the minimum requirements, they are changing. Now you cannot expect a bank not to make an ATM card for you, right? So this is how the minimum critical requirements they are changing with the changes in the time, with more globalization, right? If you go to one industry, or if you go to one organization, you automatically try, even if it is in some other industry, you make a comparison with the services that you were getting from another organization which may be operating in another industry, right? So this is how the customer demands are changing. They are increasing because of the globalization, because of their online access globally, right? So they are expecting more and more. They're expecting better services. They're expecting better products, and minimum critical requirements, they are changing. So here, this leads us to the concept of redundancy and complementarity. If, as the case that I told you earlier, if you are not changing yourself with the change in the minimum critical requirements, or with the change in the critical success factors, it can lead you to redundancy. One branch or one bank might be doing very well with its traditional banking, with a number of a huge network of branches all over the country and even across the globe, right? It might be doing very well, and that might be its strategic capability. It might be having core competencies in its operations. But with the advent of the online banking, or with the advent of the branchless banking, with the change in the critical success factors, that bank may slowly and gradually go to a disadvantage. It may not remain as competitive in the market, right? So what it needs to do is that it needs to update, it needs to upgrade its competencies, right, in order to stay competitive in the line of business. So what is happening in this case, if we carry on with this example, what is happening here is that its traditional banking services are getting redundant, its traditional competencies are getting redundant. It needs to upgrade them, right? And this is how the competencies, they can become redundant, and this is how you can lose your competitive advantage. Then we have another example of that of competitive rivalry. We discussed the competitive rivalry in our last lecture, and a number of I discussed with you a number of examples at how competitive rivalry can start between the competitors, right? And that so this competitive rivalry may make cost efficiency a threshold competence. So even if you are not into the cost leadership, or even if you're not your strategic option is not to compete on the basis of costs, or produce on lower costs, even then you need to be cost efficient, because otherwise competitive rivalry may start. Then complementarity of resources and competencies is essential. We need to understand this thing again here. It is very important, because if you have some resources, such as if you have a good brand name but you do not have marketing processes, you cannot reach your customers effectively, right? Even if you have a good brand name, right, you do not have enough marketing process or marketing facilities, right, or marketing activity is not that effective, then your good resource is going to be useless, right? So both should coexist, both should complement each other. You should have good resources as well as you should have competencies. So if you do not understand this thing, what are your resources, what are your competencies, on what basis you are going to compete, it will be difficult for you to sustain your competitive advantage, and you will be out of the game soon. Then we have the unique resources and core competencies. We just discussed threshold resources and threshold competencies, which are the minimum requirements to stay in business. Then we have the unique resources and core competencies. Unique resources are those resources which cannot be easily imitated and critically underpin competitive advantage, right? So what forms a resource a unique resource? It is that resource which cannot be easily imitated, right? And it is a critical source of a firm's competitive advantage. So as opposed to the threshold resource, unique threshold resources, they do not provide, or they cannot provide a firm competitive advantage. It is the unique resources which can provide a firm competitive advantage, right? Such as if you have a very powerful brand such as the Kellogg's, that is a unique resource. It's difficult for the competitor to enter in the market and start producing or start competing with Kellogg's and producing the breakfast cereals, because Kellogg's is a big name. It is a big brand name. It is a very powerful name, right? And it's difficult, so it's an entry barrier itself for the competitors to enter the market and start producing the Kellogg's. So it is the unique resource at the end of this company. Then we have the core competencies. They are the activities and processes through which an organization deploys the resources effectively to achieve competitive advantage in ways that are non-imitable by the competitors. Again, your core competencies are those activities and processes through which you're deploying your resources in those ways which are not imitable by your competitors, right? So such as what can be your core competence, what can be example? You're providing the services that are very unique in a very unique ways, right? So your activities or the processes which you use to provide service to your customers is very unique. That is your core competence. Or the relationship that you have built with your retailers, with your distributors, with your suppliers, that is your core competence. McKinsey and Company, I also gave an example of this in my previous lecture. They are a very famous strategic consultancy firm. They recommend that a firm needs to identify at least 3 to 4 competencies to use in framing strategic actions, right? So we'll also be discussing that why a firm needs to identify the competencies that it has and how it can do so. Okay, so we just discussed that firms may need to be cost efficient, and the cost efficiency can become, or it has become, a critical success factor for the firms, even if it is not their strategy to compete on the basis of cost efficiency or on the basis of cost leadership. They still need to be cost efficient, and that might become a critical success factor for certain firms, right? Because of the fear of the competitive rivalry that can start, right? So let's have a small discussion on what cost efficiency is determined by. Economies of scale. I discussed this earlier with you as well, that how economies of scale can lead to a firm towards cost efficiency. If you're producing in really large quantities, your fixed cost is in any way going to remain the same. So when you're producing a large amount of output, your per unit cost falls, right? And that gives you economies of scale. That is you're producing at very large scale, and that is where you're getting the economy, right? So that is the economy that you're getting from producing at very large scale. Then we have that can be a source of your cost efficiency. Then we have the supply costs, such as the cost of the raw material. You might be getting raw material at a cheaper rate. You have built very good relationships, very long-term relationships with your supplier, or your manufacturing plant is very close to the place of the raw materials, and that is why you're getting the raw material cheap, or your plant is located at a place which is close to the place where the raw material is available at very cheaper rates, right? So like many countries, they're opening their manufacturing plants in the developing countries where the raw material is available for cheap. So you can have that kind of advantage that can lead you to cost efficiency. Then experience itself can be a source of cost efficiency. So it has been reported in the literature that the organizations that are operating or that are performing certain activities they're into a line of business for a long time, for them the output or the efficiency is much more than the firms who are newer into the line of business. So they can produce more output compared to the firms with the same cost compared to the firms who are new, right? So that is how their per unit cost declines, because they're giving more productivity. right? And that is because of the experienced human resources that the organization can have. That is because they get hands-on experience with the processes, with the activities, right? They develop routines on the basis of performing those activities again and again, and they come out with the best ways to produce or to utilize those processes and those activities, and to get the maximum output in lesser time and with lesser effort and with lesser amount of waste. Then we have the product and process design. It can again be a source of competitive advantage. How your product is designed, how the process is designed, right? That can provide you cost. With that you can give cost efficient output or cost efficient service, right? Like in the case of Canon, it beats Xerox with its ultimate designs, right? It's ultimate, as a result of its ultimate designs, it's the service and its output, it really improved, right? Because of its the design of its product. Then we have this robustness of strategic capabilities. Strategic capability is basically, we can say that it's the combination of the resources and the competencies that you utilize. They are your strategic capability. We have done so far is that you need to have unique resources and core competencies to gain competitive advantage and to sustain that competitive advantage. With threshold resources and threshold competencies, you can only survive in the line of business, but to gain advantage and to sustain that advantage, you need to have unique resources and core competencies, and they should complement each other, right? So this is what we have done so far. Now we are going to see that what makes your strategic capabilities robust. One, they should be rarity, such as you have collection of the unique books in a library, so they are not easily available in the other libraries. Those unique books, they're classical books, for example, classical writings, right? They are not available easily, and they are not substitutable as well. So that is rare, that is robust. Then intellectual capital, particularly talented individuals. Of course, no other firm can, or no other competitor can produce the intellectual capital or the talented individuals. It's difficult to imitate them, it is difficult to substitute them, so they are your rare resource as well. Such as, you can take the example of Steve Jobs. The people like Steve Jobs are not easily to produce. They are not easily found. Competitors cannot, neither they can imitate them nor they can substitute them. They are rarely found. So that kind of people are your intellectual capital. Then we have the relationships with key customers. They can of course be, you can develop that kind of relation, such as the loyalty that PepsiCo or Coca-Cola, they have won from its customers. The relationships it has won with its customers, it's really difficult for another competitor to win that kind of customers or win that kind of loyalty. It might take decades. Then we have the harmonious functioning of the firms. That can again be a rarity for a firm that its competitors may not be easily able to achieve. Then we have the capabilities around resources. They may not be rare, as intellectual capital may move, competencies may be rare and non-transferable. So here we have the point that, of course, when we are talking about the strategic capability, we are talking about the resources and the competencies, right? Here we have a comment that the resources, the intellectual capital, which is your resource, that is rare, but that can easily be poached by your competitor, right? So if you have certain human resource that is really rare, if you're very skillful or very talented manager, he can easily move to your competitor, right? And if it's moved to your competitor, then that resource is gone, right? So, but the competencies, they are the resources, the processes or the activities that cannot be easily poached by the competitor. We'll see that in further in our next slides. Then we have the non-imitability, that is your competencies or your strategic capability, it should not be easily imitated by your competitor. It should not be able to be imitated, because if it is able to be imitated by your competitor, then your competitive advantage is gone, right? If you have certain competency and it's difficult for that competency to be not to be imitable by the competitor, there are a few explanations to it, such as the causal ambiguity. Causal ambiguity is when the competencies, they get embedded into the organizational culture so well that it is difficult to explain the cause and effect, that what is causing what, right? So such as the tacit knowledge on organizational processes, which is built in more in culture, it may not be readily identifiable, countercultural for competitor, right? So of course, when you are working over time with the certain processes and utilizing certain activities in an organization, and they become your daily routines, the way you are performing them, they become so embedded into the day-to-day routines and they form so much the part of the culture of the organization that it may be difficult for your competitor to identify them and to copy them. So it is difficult to identify what is the cause and effect relationship, right? So it's difficult, they become difficult to imitate. Then the logical path, it cannot be explicitly defined, and it's taken for granted. There are certain formal ways of doing things, right, which are noted down, which are written down, and there are certain informal ways of doing things as well, right? Those informal ways, they are not even, it may be difficult for you even to identify that what are those informal ways with which you do things, because you're not consciously aware of those ways of doing things, right? And they can also be a source of your competitive advantage, because you're doing it so efficiently, activity and routine has been set like that is giving you competitive advantage, right? And so they're difficult to be identifiable even for yourself. So of course, then it would be really difficult for your competitor to identify them and then to imitate them. So the robust strategic capability, one of the quality of those capabilities is that they are non-imitable. Other than that, they are rare. Then the linkage ambiguity, as partly I explained you earlier, that it's difficult to identify that which activities and which processes are linked to whom, which one is performed when, right? What is the chain of that linkage? So the way customers are dealt on phone, for example, return policies on goods, the flexibility in deliveries, etc. They are the examples of these types of ambiguities, the linkage ambiguity. Then you have valuable. Your strategic capabilities, they should be valuable, right? Unless and until they are valuable, you have unique capabilities, you have unique resources, you have core competencies, which means that you have unique capabilities, but they may not lead you to competitive advantage. That is also very much possible. That is possible when your customers do not value them, right? You have very unique, you have any very unique resource of books in the library, just as I gave you an example before under unique resources. But what if nobody is interested in reading those books? They are no more valuable, they are no more your competitive advantage. So only when something, some product or some service that is unique and that is also valued by the customer, only then that gives you competitive advantage, and only then that can be a source of sustainable competitive advantage. Then the non-substitutable. The competencies, the capabilities that you have, they should not be substitutable. So they may also be situation dependent. Just as I gave you the example earlier of the causal ambiguity, so this point is also a little linked to that if your competencies, if they are substitutable, of course they are no more your they are no more your source of competitive advantage, right? So only if they are non-substitutable, they are the source of your competitive advantage. So what happens is that if we, for example, take the example of McDonald's, McDonald's opened its branches worldwide. In some parts of the world, it could not succeed, although it tried to implement the similar processes, similar activities, similar infrastructure in everywhere in the world, right? But it could not succeed in some parts of the world, and it's very successful in the others, right? Why is that? Because as I told you earlier, that these activities and processes that become your core competencies, they are difficult to identify for the firm itself. So it's again, then in that case, it's difficult for the firm to to adopt that kind of business model for other branches of the same firm, right, or for other units, or for in the other locations of the same firm, because these activities and processes, they build over time. They become embedded in your culture. They become part of your culture, right? So it is difficult for you to even imitate them in an other outlet of your own firm, right? So then the competencies, they can be created within an organization and outside with the suppliers and distributors. So it's not that these core competencies, they need to be limited to your activities and processes within your line of business or within your firm, right? But they can also be with your suppliers, they can also be with your distributors or retailers, right? Just as Dell, what is the core competence of Dell? Outsourcing. We'll be coming to that point later. Then we have the dynamic capabilities. Dynamic capabilities are, we need to understand this concept, and let's try to recall the concept of redundancy of the capabilities that I just discussed with you. So in relation to that, the organization or the firm should be able to understand that it needs to constantly upgrade its resources and competencies so that they don't become redundant, or the ones that have become redundant, it should get rid of them. So if the organization, if for example, in an era of online banking, since I started that example and explained all the concepts with that example, so I would continue with that here again. If in the era of online or the branchless banking, the bank who are operating with branches, and they're spending a lot on the maintenance of those branches, it means that they are feeding their redundant resources. They can not be a source of competitive advantage for those branches or for that bank again, right? Because the critical success factors have changed. They are constantly changing. Minimum requirements are increasing from the customers, right? So they are the redundant resources. By deploying your future resources in the maintenance of those branches or in provision of those services, that what is that doing? That is not letting you invest in the new forms of banking, right? So you should get rid of those redundant resources, those redundant competencies, and you should try to upgrade them, right? So that is the concept of dynamic capabilities. Dynamize your capabilities, right? Because your competitive advantage, gaining the competitive advantage is not that difficult, but sustaining the competitive advantage is a real challenge, right? And I also told you earlier that under stable environments, your competitive advantage, it is relatively easier to sustain your competitive advantage, but under hyper competitive environments like the firms are facing nowadays, it's difficult for them to sustain their competitive advantage unless and until they continuously go on upgrading their resources and competencies. So what are the different cautions and reminders that the managers need to keep in mind when we're talking about the concept of these core competencies? Never take for granted that core competencies will continue to provide a source of competitive advantage. Just as I told you in my earlier example, that branch banking might be a core competence for a bank in past few decades, but no more now. It's a gone case. Then all core competencies have the potential to become core rigidities. So when those core competencies, they become redundant, they become the core rigidities. Core rigidities are former core competencies that sow the seeds of organizational inertia and prevent the firm from responding appropriately to changes in the external environment, right? And a firm falls in strategic drift, the concept I explained to you earlier. Then strategic myopia and inflexibility, they can strangle the firm's ability to grow and adapt to environmental change or competitive threats. Then there are a few reasons why firm enters into this myopia. I explained you in my previous lecture in very detail that how the planning processes of the firms take place, how the organizational culture and how this inertia develops, and how the organizational structure plays its role in development of this kind of inflexibility, right? So we discussed all this in detail. Let's come up with an example of Caterpillar, which is a construction manufacturing company, and it deals with a range of diversified products such as construction and mining equipment, gas engines. It attributes its success to the technology it uses and resources it spends to update its internal environment, right? So what is important here for you to see is that this company has identified what are the key competencies or what are the core competencies of this company. It has identified the technology that it is using and the resources that it spends to upgrade its internal environment. They are the key competencies of this company, and it is spending $4 million per day to maintain competitive advantage through technology. So in order to keep current in technology, it is spending huge amount because it knows that is its source of competitive advantage. If it is not invest in its technology, the technology will go obsolete and the firm will run out of business. Then we have another example of enterprise rent-a-car. 5,000 plus offices the company has worldwide, and it's continuously expanding, and its CEO attributes its success to employees' efforts and intellectual capital they represent. So you see that here the source of competitive advantage that this company has identified is different than was the case of Caterpillar. And then we have the Japanese automobile. It reduced GM Motors' dominance with narrow asset base. How this Japanese automobile company dominated the US market, although it had very narrow asset base, through its lower costs, through the improved quality, and through fast production processes. So they are the sources of its competitive advantage. Here we see in these three different examples that the source of competitive advantage or the core competencies and the unique resources of all these firms are different from each other, and how they are investing in their resources, in their competencies to stay current in the line of business and to stay competitive. So it's important to that the value, it should be measured by product's performance characteristics and by attributes for which the customers are willing to pay. So increasing perceptions of higher value in global than local brands. Of course, how your product or services is rated by your customer is important. That is how you can define value. That is how you can create value. Then we have the value creating potential of primary resources. We are going to see these are the different elements that are present in a value chain of a firm, right? The basic value chain. There are primary activities that are going on in a firm, and there are the support activities that are going on in a firm to give a certain level of output to be presented in the market or to be served in the market, right? So we have the inbound logistics, we have the operations, outbound logistics, marketing and sales and services under the primary activities head. So let's go back to the previous slide and have a look at what these different activities are, the primary activities. So primary activities are those activities which are directly involved in producing a certain product or service. Inbound logistics, it refers to the activities which are used to receive, to store, and to disseminate the inputs that are to be used in a product. Then operations are those activities and processes which you utilize to convert the inputs or to convert the raw material that has been provided to you by the inbound logistics into the final product. Then we have the outbound logistics. They are the activities which are involved with collecting, storing, and physically distributing the product to customers. The marketing and sales, which are the activities which are used to provide the customers the products, right? And so that they are able to purchase them, and how you are able to induce your customers to buy your products, right? So marketing activities that take place. Then you have the service. Service is after you have sold the product to the customer, the services that you are providing them, right? So if the customer wants to replace some product, or if there are some problems with the product, and the services that you're providing to the customer, right? So that kind of services come under this head. Then we have the support activities, under which we have the procurement. Procurement is the activities which are used to purchase your inputs, the raw material, right? Then we have the technology, what kind of technology you're using, right? Then you have the human resource management, the personnel that is engaged in the process of the production or in the process of the servicing. So all the activities which are related to human resource management, such as recruitment, such as hiring, such as training and developing, etc., and the firm's general infrastructure to produce that the products or to carry on the activities. Okay, so why is what information or what do you get from this value chain? Okay, we have discussed the various parts of this value chain. We have discussed the primary activities, we have discussed the supplementary activities or the support activities to carry on those primary activities, right? But what do we get out of this? We need to analyze our value chain, because it is a breakdown of the activities that are taking place in the company at various steps, starting from the procurement to the inbound logistics, where you get and where you store all the raw material, where you warehouse all the raw material, right? So step by step, it gives us the information of the costs and the associated benefits or the profits that we are getting at each step. So at the stage of the raw material, what is your cost and how much you're saving there? At the stage of operations, so it gives us the step-by-step analysis that what are our costs, where we are expensive and where we are cheap, which activities we are performing better and which activities we are weak at. So it gives us the analysis, a very detailed analysis of our strengths and weaknesses at various steps. Right? Whether they are the primary steps or whether they are the support activities or whether they are the primary activities. You're strong in marketing or what are your weak areas in marketing? How much time you're taking to market your product when it's ready and it's in the company store, right? So it is giving you the information at every step of your strengths and weaknesses. You should analyze your value chain in relation to the value chain of your competitors, in relation to the value chain of your suppliers, in relation to the value chain of your distributors. That will give you an exact idea of where you stand. So you need to compare your value chain analysis with the value chain analysis of your competitors, and what kind of information is it going to give you, that if your cost ratio at the inbound logistics stage is lower, or if it is higher than that of your competitor, then it is a point of concern for you. Then it means that your competitors may be performing better at that inbound logistics, but you're performing better at the stage of the operation stage. Maybe your processes and the machinery that you're utilizing is really effective. You're utilizing your processes very effectively, and that is why your cost ratio is lower than that of your competitor. So maybe that is the area of your strength. You're doing marketing very well. You're dealing with your distributors very well, right? You're giving after sales service very well, right? So this is how you're trying to identify your strengths and your weaknesses vis-a-vis those of your competitors, right? So cost benefit analysis, it provides you at various levels, right? And you need to see it in relation to your value network. So these are the different benefits that you can get from your value chain. You can analyze your strengths, you can analyze your weaknesses. So what are the key questions for managers when it comes to the internal analysis? You need to see, how do we assemble bundles of resources, capabilities and core competencies to create value for customers? And will environmental change make our core competencies obsolete? Manager needs to constantly have a thinking on these, right? Are substitutes available for our core competencies? Are our core competencies easily imitated? So you need to see what are your core competencies, whether they are imitable or not, or whether they are robust or not. Then we just briefly discussed already that organizational, the tacit and the explicit knowledge that a firm has. So there are the two types of knowledge bases. One is explicit knowledge and the other one is the implicit knowledge. Explicit is which is codified, and implicit is which is not codified. It is in soft form, right? So a firm needs to provide that kind of opportunities to the members or to the employees in the organization, so that they can share their implicit knowledge as well, other than the explicit knowledge which is easily available to everyone, so as the organizational knowledge memory that can be enhanced and it can provide the opportunities for the firm to learn more, right, and be more flexible to the environmental changes. So of course it is more easy, or it is more chances to flourish this kind of knowledge base when there are less and less demarcation of roles, and there are lesser and lesser boundaries. So it means that when there are lesser and lesser rigidity in the organizational structure, there is more flexibility, then it's easier for the people to have better social networks and to share knowledge. So I just told you that value chain analysis helps you analyze your strengths and your weaknesses at different positions in your value chain, and it can also help you make your outsourcing decisions based on your value chain analysis. So you can identify your weaknesses, and you can outsource the services in which you feel that you are not that strong, right? So it can improve your business focus, the decision to outsource. It can improve your business focus. It can let company focus on broader business issues by having outside experts handle various operational details. It can provide you access to world-class capabilities, right? So some operations, for example, or some activities that the firm is not performing very well, it can make an analysis. It can make can collect data from the external environment, and can see that where it can get those services at a lower price and better in quality, right? So the other firm who is better at the production of that product or providing that service, it can take the services from that firm. It can outsource it from that firm, and it can really spend on its own strengths, right? So that it polishes its core competencies, and where it is weak and some other firm has the core competency to produce something else, it can import that, or it can outsource that product or service from the other firm who has the core competency to produce that product or that raw material or whatever it is, right? So of course the risk sharing is there when you are outsourcing, right? You are not entirely investing into everything yourself. It is a cheap source for you as well. So that is what the Dell is doing. Dell's core competence is outsourcing, as I discussed with you earlier, right? So it does not make anything itself. It outsources everything. Then the activity maps. Activity maps basically help an organization to pinpoint what are the different activities that are used to produce something, right? And how those activities are linked up. As I told you earlier, that there is causal ambiguity and there is linkage ambiguity, which does not allow a firm to understand itself what are its core competencies, right? So through activity mapping, what you do is that you are writing down all the activities, all the small activities that are taking place in the organization, and then you link them up together, that this activity was performed at this time, for example, this was performed at this, and this was performed after this, and then you have activity map. So activity map at Southwest Airline, you know, it's a low-cost airline, and it's one of the leading airlines and most profitable airlines in US, and many other airlines, they tried to follow the model of Southwest Airlines, but they could not succeed. That was because of the activities and processes that the Southwest was using. They were so much embedded in the culture of that airline that even the firm itself did not know that what are the sources of its competitive advantage or what are its core competencies. So activity mapping at Southwest shows that it had the frequent and reliable departures, it had lean, highly productive ground and gate crews, it had high aircraft utilization, it had very low ticket prices, no meals, no seat assignments, no baggage transfers, automatic ticketing machines, and no connections with other airlines. These are a few examples from the activity map that I have taken to present you here. There are almost 17 to 18 activities that have been pointed out, and that have been written down to form the activity map of Southwest Airline in order to realize that what actually are the core competencies of this company. course, then a firm can do the internal and internal assessment by two ways. One is the qualitative way and one is the quantitative way. Quantitative way, it can do by ways of balanced scorecard and by ways of basic financial ratios. So balanced scorecard, if, as you must be familiar, that it takes into account all the different areas, such as the financial area, the ratio analysis, the customers, then how the customers they value your product in terms of the differentiation, low cost or response, then the operations, that which processes the firm need to improve, how should they be changed, then the organizational, what is the adaptability to change of the organization, and so on. So it is the assessment on all these different areas. And then we have the qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis is the qualitative information that you get to do analyze your internal strengths and weaknesses, right? So it can be you're taking information about the employee morale, about the commitment and the creativity of the employee. You can take the views of the employees and the customers about their satisfaction, right? So Motorola does this qualitative analysis, and it invests almost $600 million annually, which is based on the qualitative analysis. So that is it for today's lecture, for today's presentation. I hope you had good understanding of why internal assessment is done, how it is done, and why is it important, what are its implications for the management. Thank you all. Hope to see you again. Allah Hafiz.